Welcome to Conscious Marketing Movement podcast, where we bring you thought-provoking conversations to challenge traditional marketing practices and inspire a new paradigm, shaping the future of marketing for a better tomorrow. In our first season, we'll explore how can marketing drive climate action. We'll be talking with sustainability communicators, brand strategists, designers, all sharing their knowledge and first-hand experiences. So whether you're listening to us at home with your favorite beverage or on your daily commute, make yourself comfortable and enjoy the episode.
Okay, hello Akhila. Welcome to Conscious Marketing Movement podcast. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with us today. I know you had a busy week at New York Climate Week.
Yeah.
How was that?
It was a lot. I've been to SF Climate Week before. I was very climate tech oriented. But this was my first New York Climate Week, and it was good to see a lot of diversity of topics ranging from like careers to policy, finance, and not singular focus on like deep tech or climate tech specifically. So that was good to see, but it was obviously a lot to balance like work and all the events.
Okay, so thank you again. So Akhila is a human-centered designer for system change who believes that design can accelerate the climate movement. She's designed digital products for millions of users, helped raise multiple rounds of investments, ran nationwide campaigns, and reimagined entire customer experiences with all types of innovators, from project leaders in governments to the CEOs of growing startups. Wow, welcome. I wanted to ask you, before you kind of start maybe by taking you back in time, before you had all these incredible achievements and adjectives next to your name, when you were a student of architecture, can you maybe take us back to our time and maybe share your journey from that time to building your agency, Whatever Design?
Yeah, for sure. I think for those who don't know, I originally started out in architecture, thought I wanted to be an architect, did the whole thing, got licensed back in India, worked on LEED platinum buildings to city planning 11 projects, got the incredible chance of like working across multiple areas. I worked in Sri Lanka, Vietnam, in India as well. I think architecture was when people asked me when I was a child what you wanted to become, I felt like I would answer, depending on my mood, I would either say artist or scientist. I didn't know what that meant, but for some reason architecture kind of felt like a merge of the both, where it's a little bit of engineering, a little bit of creativity, you have to think in systems, but there's a lot of beauty and like visual poetry to it as well. So I think that's how I kind of like started into this field and kind of got into it. But I quickly realized a lot of the things that I wanted to do in life, whether it was starting my own venture or having a heavy environmental sustainability piece of it, I felt like a few parts of it were a little slow moving for the kind of impact that I wanted to have. For those who don't know, architecture is a field where if you're trying to work in a corporate, that's great. You get access to these huge projects that have massive impact, and it's really great. But I felt like I always had like an entrepreneur in me. I wanted to start my own thing. And if you want to do that in architecture, you either need to come from like a pretty well-to-do / well-networked background to have access to the people who have the decision-making power for projects like that, which I am not from a very traditional background. My parents were like first time, like they built everything by themselves and got the chance to educate us. But I think that was something about the field that I didn't realize until I got to see this whole stretch and this whole spectrum of projects. And I'm really lucky that I got to do that really quickly in my career, because most people don't get to see all of that until 10-15 years. So that was a really accelerated learning for me to understand that the field itself, I really loved the design part of it, but I wanted to shift a little bit more towards the digital and technology enabled side of things as well, because me and my co-founder, we had always been working in UX. We'd been working with a lot of founders, early stage testing sort of thing, we were honestly seeing millions of users. So I think to see that balance of, projects taking years to get fulfilled versus seeing these marketing campaigns, these big enterprise products that we were building have this massive impact. I think that dichotomy kind of led me to kind of try to figure out where is my position in this. And that's kind of what led us to start the agency.
Okay, so you wanted a challenge and also wanted to, I guess, make a quicker impact.
Yes.
Did you, at the time, did you feel you were already aware of what's happening with our planet? Like when did the sustainability and kind of awareness of the climate crisis come for you?
Inherently, I've always been like an environmentally conscious person. While studying architecture as well, I was always naturally drawn towards sustainable architecture. I got to work on like prospective LEED platinum building, which kind of like showed me the intricacy, the checkboxing that comes with a lot of like environmental impact metrics and things like that as well. So I think that was a part that was key, I felt, for my career overall. Us trying to figure that out in the agency, I think, came much later on, because in architecture, sustainability is a very key piece because buildings have a huge impact. The construction industry as a whole has a big emissions reduction potential as well. So it comes with that inherent responsibility, but not a lot of designers in the digital world feel that responsibility, I would say. So when I kind of moved away from architecture and when we started this agency, this was the peak of the pandemic. So we ended up working with like two big unicorns in India for COVID vaccination creative campaigns. We worked with the Ministry of Health of Saudi Arabia for a large scale enterprise product for their healthcare systems that would be implemented nationwide. So this was very healthcare oriented, but we were also doing like everything across the space, across industries. So really I was missing that inherent piece of like, where's the environmental impact, where like what's our work leading up to, sort of thing. That's kind of when we essentially started trying to proactively think about where do we fit in this space from a digital design perspective. Skill set wise, we had found the fit, but industry application wise, it felt like we needed a more deep seated problem space we were working in. And that's kind of when we essentially started like reading up a lot, researching the climate tech space and trying to get a sense of where we would fit in.
Was this the time when you did this huge market research, when you said you contacted over 100 climate-focused companies and people? Can you tell us more about this market research? What was the motivation? What were you trying to find out with this market research? And what was the outcome?
We were honestly just trying to figure out where we fit in. Like, as someone who is getting into like the climate tech space specifically, people on the outside think that it might be like a niche down space, but people on the inside realize that that's just too broad. There are multiple kinds of applications, multiple kinds of business models. The kind of stakeholders are very varied. So I think it was a very messy ecosystem for us to first map and figure out where do we come in with expertise. That was like the motivation for us to figure out where do we fit in this entire spectrum. So we started essentially with like figuring out what the problem is, really understanding, yes, everybody knows climate change is real, it exists, but what are the key factors driving it? What are the key areas of emission sources? What are the problems that are worth solving? And what are the levers that different kinds of stakeholders can pull was something that we needed to get an understanding on before, figuring out how we fit in anywhere in here, right? So I had like 7 or 8 ideas that I was walking away that, I could build this. Or with all of these ideas, essentially that kind of led us to reach out to different people. So that's why trying to figure out in the innovation space, we spoke to a ton of investors, founders, other service providers, just trying to understand like different pieces and validate some of the ideas that we had. It definitely signaled us clearly that climate tech needs design. Climate tech is still a little bit behind in that sense. A lot of the folks that are driving the space are scientists, they're PhD folks. They're very
Very
technical.
academic.
Exactly, academic, technology driven kind of people. Very smart, but obviously they're more focused on the technology rather than the business side slash the adoption side of things. And design truly is a means or a tool just for adoption. You create any user experience that's delightful, it's going to make people want to use it.
Yeah.
If you have visual identity that's super attractive and has like really on point messaging, you're going to attract the right kind of people. So essentially speaking to all of these folks put us in that space where we felt like it was the right time to take that decision, where there's market need, there's a area where we can actually make impact too. And that's when we essentially decided to focus on working with climate tech companies. It's been about a year now.
Okay.
But yeah, that's where we are.
Amazing. Well done. Market research is one of those steps that I think a lot of entrepreneurs want to kind of skip and, jump and just make things happen. But it's so necessary, because here also at Conscious Marketing Movement, we also talk about not creating fake needs, but serving what are the existing needs.
Yep.
So I think you did, you're doing just that. But for our listeners, Akhila, can you maybe explain a bit more about, because I think when you live in design world, some of the terms, are so understandable. But for people probably who are thinking of joining climate space, maybe wanting to be climate marketers or designers, can you explain what is sustainable design? How do you understand it and how do you practice it?
That's a big question.
Okay.
I think I think general direction of what sustainable design means is that it needs to have longevity, whether that's with the kind of resources it uses, the kind of people it serves. When I talk about like resources, anything, whether that's a building, an object, app, whatever it is, it needs not just like financial resources, technical resources, but also obviously environmental resources, like what is going into the product. And then on the needs side of things, it has to be something that people really want to use. So I think for me, the word sustainable typically means just like longevity of why something needs to exist. Now, when you talk about environmental sustainability, let's say if you're an architect, it could look like LEED buildings, net zero buildings, which essentially operate in such a way that they, like, you see these off the grid homes, right? That generate power on site, that use the water on the site, waste management system, everything essentially is within that piece of land. That's like one direction probably. When you talk about, let's say, industrial design, sustainable design, on the entire product life cycle, how is the product being made to being used to being dispersed? Looking at the entirety of what's the design, what's the materials that go into it, where are these materials being sourced, are these regenerative materials that can be grown or made out of widely available resources, and then while using it, how long is this product essentially going to exist, how many cycles of use would it be in when a user is like done with using the product? Where does it go? Does it go back into the ecosystem of like creating a newer version of it that goes back into the loop, or does it go into disposal? So I think
So the idea of circular economy.
exactly. Obviously, digital design also has a very big emissions footprint if you take it as a whole. But I think the power of digital design is definitely more on the application side of things, where it can be used to make the experience way more delightful and engaging for someone, in order to choose a sustainable innovation over something that's business as usual.
I think that's really important, and I'm actually really glad that more and more people and companies in climate space are addressing the digital sustainability and digital footprint. I even heard now something crazy, like it's the the footprint is bigger than probably aviation industry. I don't know if that's true, don't quote me on that, but it just builds the picture that it is a massive footprint. So addressing that through design, I guess is one of the areas that people can look into it.
Are you ready to grow your business in a way that aligns with your values and purpose? In a way that truly feels right for you? Hi, I'm Claudia Guerreiro, and I'm the founder of the Conscious Marketing Movement. I am here to personally invite you to the Conscious Mind Summit. This virtual summit is organized by the Conscious Marketing Movement and Humble Mind. This virtual summit is happening from 20th to 24th January 2025, with sessions from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Central European Time. You will explore long-term growth, values-driven leadership, conscious marketing, all in one supportive and caring space. Picture this: live learning sessions, one-on-one daily coffee matchups with like-minded people, access to replays, and the option to join both the Conscious Marketing Movement and Humble Mind online communities. If this resonates with you, I would love to see you there. Visit consciousmindsummit.com, learn more, and join us.
You also say that you focus on a human-centered approach. Can you maybe share a success story where this approach really worked, where you're like, maybe you can explain a bit what it is, what a human-centered approach is, and share maybe a case study that you worked on?
So when you talk about human centricity, it's a catch-22 situation, because we are also to some blame of human centricity, because we want everything to be convenient. We want everything to be oriented. We want the world to be oriented towards humans, despite many different species, despite us being a very tiny part of the entire ecosystem. So I think that is a part of the origination of the problem. But I think the thesis that I have is that it can also be a part of the solution. You do choose experiences and products that are made for you, that feel like this resonates with me, sort of thing, right? If you're trying to like balance it with systems change, essentially it means that you want to map out all the stakeholders that are within your value chain, whether it's through your journey, not just your users, but also your like users and customers naturally obviously evolve, but who are your partners, who are people who are providing that service. An example for that would be, there is a company called Fool in India, which essentially recycles and repurposes flowers from like religious activities. Like for those of you who don't know, like people who pray every day use a lot of flowers in India. So it's a huge wastage problem. But what they've done is they've literally taken that and kind of turned all of those flowers into incense sticks and byproducts. And it's become a really huge company. And something that they've done is they've employed women from the temples, they've employed women rag pickers to actually help in the processing. So it's not just the input output sort of thing, but trying to figure out who are all the people across your operations, and how do we design for all of them and not just your end user or customer. So I was working on this impact measurement and management platform. So what we were working on was something that would help early stage entrepreneurs build their theory of change or their logic model. So the problem we were working on was that social entrepreneurs, they are kind of like motivated by impact investors to kind of prove the impact that they're making. But often when you're like really early in your stages, you don't have the time to like sit and measure your impact. There's little documentation. You're focused on building a sustainable business. So there's not enough resources for that. The tool that we ended up creating was essentially something that would nudge the founder to kind of like connect their data and also like suggest them action points, rather than talking about the jargon that impact measurement brings of these different frameworks. Moving away from that and moving more towards metrics, trying to nudge them how each of these can actually result in like a business strategy decision as well. When you align both of them, you're essentially aligning where the impact is, where people want your product or service as well, and the monetary incentives too. So bringing that alignment and making it super easy, actionable, not going into the jargon, but like making it end user friendly was something I think that got a lot of people excited when we like built out the prototype. And
I really like it. I really start imagining the whole kind of system ecosystem thinking. When I start talking with designers, I feel like you have this ability, I guess, what you shared at the beginning when you were a child and wanting to, having a very scientific mind and kind of the system thinking mind, but at the same time wanting to be creative. I think this is a really perfect area where you can practice the both and bridge these gaps, build bridges. That's amazing. But for someone who's aspiring to be a sustainable designer, more talking about UX designer, maybe website design, interfaces design, how should they approach choosing their specific area in this field? Yeah, where do you start?
I would say read up as much as you can as a starting point. It's about like there's this thing, there was an exercise we did called climate ikigai. Essentially, like what do you love doing? What will get the bills paid? And then like what has a lot of climate impact too. First, getting a lay of the land of the foundations and understanding who is actually solving the problems, because there's a lot of greenwashing out there. And I think what this exercise helps you do is identify that. As fancy as some terms sound, a lot of people are also solving non-problems. It is not only the biggest challenge of our lifetime, but it's also the biggest opportunity of our lifetime, because we need to reimagine everything, right? Which means that there are a lot of bad players out there. I know it's easy to just claim and say that I'm climate focused X, but if you don't do your research, you are not going to be able to identify the folks that are claiming to solve a problem that doesn't exist. So I think figuring out what are the right problems you want to solve/work on is very important. And then talk to as many people as you can. If you take people with a little bit of experience, there must be some natural pattern that has kind of emerged in terms of whether you've worked in healthcare or like a specific sector or any specific area that you have deep industry knowledge in or have skill sets that are useful to that, or whether it's like the kind of business model, whether you've worked mostly on like the B2B side of things slash the B2C side of things. For example, we at What If have worked on a lot of like enterprise software. We've worked on mostly B2B products like EV battery management systems, ESG vendor sourcing platforms used by corporates, things like that, that are not something you can just go out in the market and get consumer feedback on, right? So someone who's designing for that is going to have to think very differently compared to someone who is designing for like a D2C product. Let's say like a Misfits market or Impossible Foods or like any consumer product. The customer journey and experience for that would look very different. Things like this, like what are the business models you've worked on, industries you've worked on, where's your skill sets, what do you enjoy, and within climate, what are the sectors where great work is being done in the space. Reach out, talk to people who are already working there, understand what they love about their job, what they thought they were going to be doing, or what they thought their impact would be, and what it is truly. After research, I would say just talking to people, figuring this out, and basically figuring out whom to talk to, and then talking to them can give you a lot of clarity in terms of what are things that would fit you as well, because it has to be a mutual fit in order for it to be again long sustainable for you, right?
I agree. Great advice. Love it. I think I would add, or maybe just elaborate more on the enjoyment part, especially if we here in Conscious Marketing Movement, we look into kind of small and medium scale companies, and we have a lot of freelancers here.
Yeah.
And when you're working on by yourself, it gets lonely. So focusing on the area that you feel really passionate about, and maybe doing a climate course. There's lots of different courses out there that to give you general understanding of like what are the problems and what are the solutions. And as you mentioned, there's so many different areas. You can go into law, into finance, into sustainability reporting. You can look into oceans or deforestation. And I feel like while you're going through that course, really feel what moves you, and kind of stick to that area, because then going deeper in that area, I think that would be my advice too, just because there's so much to learn and we just can't know everything.
Yeah. I see a lot of people burning out within climate too. Like it's not an easy transition. So I would say that focus on what brings you joy along with your skill sets and what you want to do. Like the personal fit is as important as the outcome of your work. Because if you put all this effort, work in climate for say 2 years, and then you're burnt out and want to move into cybersecurity or something completely different, you've put in so much work. It is helpful when people transition to it sustainably as well for themselves.
I agree. I think a lot of us in climate space are guilty of, burnout. I definitely been there, done that. And then I came to the realization, hang on, if we're not gonna look after our inner nature, then well, there's gonna be just no people to do the work that needs to be done. So yeah, thank you for bringing that into attention. I think it's very important also in our community when we are creating impactful businesses and creating impactful communications to really look after each other and kind of cheer each other on our journeys, because once that fact is clear, this is a kind of a long-term game. This is not like a short success. We're not going to solve a climate crisis in the next year or two. Well, they say words are your magic. Maybe I shouldn't have said that. But, being realistic, it will take us longer than that. So definitely looking after ourselves is very important. One more question I had for you, and I don't know how much of the actual copywriting you do with your agency, but when it comes to urgency, that's a question that I've been kind of pondering about. And usually with conscious marketing practices, we really try to move away from any urgency, to really give space for people to make a decision. How do they feel about it? So when they're not being manipulated with that fake urgency, like you need to buy this now, you need to make a decision now. However, we are in climate emergency. So how do you feel? How do you juggle this contradiction?
The problem that we're solving is urgent. Any hope that's going to exist is only going to be there if we act urgently. Within this space, most people are not solving for climate. So as someone who's trying to transition as a professional, you might think that you're transitioning into this space which has this huge impact. Like if I'm trying to source materials for a product that I'm building, environmental sustainability is not going to be the first thing on my mind. It might be a tiebreaker. Even just take an example of, say, finding flights to meet family. You're not going to click on the first one that says this has the lowest carbon impact. You're probably going to look at price first. You're going to look at convenience. And then probably third, fourth, or whatever the tiebreaker, if all of these align, might be your environmental sustainability piece of it, right? How many times have you reacted to an urgent problem that does not affect your daily life, at least immediately? The decision making, I think it is like any business. When you're talking about urgency in copywriting, people are not going to be moved by thinking about the climate. When it comes to climate advocacy, that's a different thing. But when you're trying to build a business, I don't think showing that urgency is going to make a difference. Like, you want to talk about the benefit, you want to talk about what's making their job easier, and not necessarily like because climate is nobody's problem. It's not one person's problem. It's the entire world's problem, which means that everyone feels that that's too big for them to solve / think about. I think urgency is more of an action rather than a convincer when it comes to business. Like, you trying to move faster is probably a different thing, is probably something we need. Trying to convince people to take action quickly, I don't think that would work as much.
I guess what I'm getting from this conversation, if I had to like pick the highlights, it's like focus on the problem. How am I going to solve the real problem, not the
Yep.
big problem? Because that question is so simple, yet so powerful. So thank you so much, Akhila, for this conversation. For the final question, I just have, I usually ask, because we talked about looking after oneself and looking after the community. What keeps you going on daily life? What feeds you? What gives you energy?
That's a tough one. Oh wow. Actually, it's not a tough one. I think it's definitely the people around me. Like my team, the kind of people that I'm having conversations with every day. There's a drive to build and solve for something that's bigger than them, which I really appreciate. And I feel like generally being in the climate space, I've seen a lot of really thoughtful people, incredibly smart, again, very humble, down to earth sort of people. And I don't know if I'm seeing only one side of this space. It's been genuinely giving me joy to see how much people are like willing to help and willing to contribute because of a mission that's bigger than their personal space, I guess.
That's beautiful. It's so beautiful to end with such a note, with such a positive note. I think we have so many questions to solve that this space can get really heady, really, scientific, academic, and analytical. So I think it's really important for us to take a step back, come back to our human nature, to go back into nature, keep connecting, keep being with one another, and helping each other out. So thank you so much, Akhila, again, for supporting conscious marketing movement and our mission, what we're trying to do here. And well done, and congrats with all the work that you're doing. And best of luck.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And if you would like to learn more about what is conscious marketing and join a community of entrepreneurs and change makers, marketers, head to consciousmarketingmovement.com and join the membership.